Here we go.
Awesome. So as you guys know, you guys are here for Search Engine Optimization 1.0. We're going to be going over how do we enhance our online presence and understand search engine optimization, what it is, the value of it, and how to essentially kind of implement it. So the first thing I like to kind of talk about though is make sure that we're on the same page here in understanding what search engine optimization is. Now, some of you guys may know, some of you guys may not know, but really search engine optimization or SEO is really just turning that phrase in on itself. It's optimizing our search engine presence. Really at the end of the day, what it is it's having a long-term business relationship with Google. Honestly, if there's probably one thing you take away from this course is just to understand that, again, this is a long-term business relationship with Google. It happens just like any relationship that you're going to have. If you meet someone, again, at a referral networking place, if you're introduced to someone, however it is, you know that having a business relationship with someone just doesn't happen overnight. It happens in different phases. There has to be a bunch of touch points. There's trust on both ends. There's other variables on what that individual is communicating with other people, maybe in your industry or competitors. So again, just kind of think about that as we're going through that. Again, this is like having a long-term business relationship with Google. So really though, the idea is, what search engine optimization is though, is it's understanding and having that relationship with Google and knowing how Google wants to read your site and how they do read your site so that you can essentially improve your rankings. Because if you have a better relationship with Google, if you have things clearly, again, connected and Google can essentially read them, then we can obviously then get higher in the rankings if we know what Google's looking for and can implement those in. So what we're going to be talking about is a few things here. The first is we're going to be kind of going over content is key. Probably one of the more important things we're going to talk about today, in that how the content on our site is the first place to really start with search engine optimization and really aligning it with Google. We're also going to just kind of talk about a little bit of social media and how that plays a part into SEO. Also the mobile devices and how that is kind of revolutionized from a few years ago. SEO and SEO strategy. And then we'll also be talking a little bit about some Google tools and Google advertising. One thing I do like to mention is obviously I've said Google, again, many times since we started this presentation, but the thing to know is that even though we're focusing on Google, and honestly, most of you, if you were to look at your Google Analytics, I can almost guarantee you that the market share of Google traffic compared to Bing, Yahoo, Ask, et cetera, would most likely be, again, probably around 85 to 90%. A lot of times with small businesses, we sometimes even see above 90%. But even with that said, we still want to make sure that we're respectful and understand that there's still a percentage out there for Yahoo and Bing. The reason I mention that is that Yahoo, Bing, and other search engines have essentially conceded that, again, Google is the trailblazer. They're going to set all of these different, again, kind of strategies and even let Google test some of them out. And then they kind of fall into place. Now, yes, everything has its own little quirk or their own little system. But what I'm getting at though is if we focus on the things that we talk about here today, even using Google as the main example, we will be able to also benefit on Yahoo and Bing and things like that. There's actually a fun fact too that, Yahoo actually doesn't even use their own search algorithm anymore. They actually just farm out Bing's. So so a lot of this is we're going to focus on Google and we're going to kind of have this ripple effect to the other ones. So the other thing, and we're just about to get the 2019 stats here. They've been a little bit delayed because of COVID. But again, the reason I mentioned some of this kind of stuff too is it's amazing. I started giving these presentations in 2011 when I was working with Google, and it's amazing that the numbers we thought were big then have just really kind of exploded. So what we're looking at here is that Google search and advertising tools generated $335 billion of economic activity in 2018. And again, we expect that number to obviously be even more for 2019. We're just waiting for those final reports to kind of come out. But you can kind of see the progression from 2011. Now, really not to go into all those numbers, but really what we're talking about is that as we all know, more and more people, no matter if we're business to business, no matter if we're business to consumer, no matter what industry, people are using search engines to make purchasing decisions or to educate themselves to help with the search process or the purchasing process. And the reason that obviously that's important is we want to be a part of that number. And you can even break down that number of just for Minnesota, benefiting 30,000 local entities. Really, at the end of the day, just making sure that we're actually putting numbers behind this. And these are honestly just Google's tools. This doesn't even include some of the other search engines to know that this number is even bigger. So one thing I always like to kind of go through as well here is whenever you do a Google search, you mainly have 5 components. Now, sometimes you will see more. Sometimes there's some newer different ad variants that you may see. Obviously, you may see a picture or an image ribbon to show you for Google Images, videos, again, a ribbon, stuff like that. But these are going to be the 5 main kind of core pieces you're going to see on any search result. And again, this also applies to Yahoo and Bing, etc. But really, anytime you do a search, it's called a search query. So if you hear us talk about that, you could do one letter, or you could talk to Siri or Google Assistant, and you could say a whole phrase or a sentence or 2 or a question. That's also considered a search query. So when you do a search query, what you get is a result that looks similar to this. Usually at the top is you're going to have some type of paid advertising. Then we're going to a lot of times have it if it's a local based search. If we have any type of, again, local, information in there in our search, if it's Minnesota, if it's a city, or even if it just, with our GPS searching, Google may throw this out there. And, we'll be actually talking about this. It's called the snack pack. And these are called local listings. Then we actually get the organic search results, which is, again, really kind of the direct content to organic search results. But here's kind of the caveat. We also have the knowledge graph on the right-hand side there, which is just a visualization of sometimes the search. But even though organic search results, as you can kind of see, are sometimes a little bit more buried than they used to be, all 3 of those, again, components that we just talked about with paid search, local listings, and the knowledge graph are all influenced by search engine optimization. And the idea here, as you can kind of see, is we have an opportunity to actually show up more often than once. So if we do SEO correctly and we build that relationship with Google, if we, again, get on the snack pack with local listings, if we decide to run ads, if we can get on the knowledge graph, you can see that we could potentially be showing up 1, 2, 3, potentially 4 times on a search result because of the different components. But really, it all starts with SEO and really kind of starts with that relationship with Google. So when we actually start to talk about SEO, though, is that it's important to realize that there are 3 different types of search engine optimization. So the 3 different types, and they're actually done in 2 different phases, which we'll also get into here in just a second. So the 3 different types of search engine optimization are, one is back-end optimization. This is all the stuff that you're essentially going to do behind the scenes of your website. So even if you have a WordPress, if you have a PHP site, if you have a Weebly, Wix, Squarespace, doesn't really matter. All of it can be, again, we can have access to the back end. Now, some platforms, especially some of the DIY builders, may limit you on some of the things that you can access, but all of us can still access some of the back end optimization. And this is usually dealing with sometimes your HTML settings, just your WordPress or your CMS, just the different coding. This one, I will admit, is usually a little bit trickier for people because we are usually dealing with things that aren't as comfortable to us because we're seeing either settings or coding or things like that. But it is an important piece kind of behind the scenes, and it's important to know. Another one is front-end optimization. So that's everything that you can see on a website. Looking at obviously all the content, all of the images, the pictures, just honestly the user experience of a site. A really important one is going to be front-end optimization. And then last but not least is offsite optimization. So offsite optimization is going to be anything that's not our website, but is connected to our website. So you can see here that 2/3 of SEO is obviously going to be on our website, but sometimes it surprises people to know that a whole third of search engine optimization and SEO strategy is not even dealing with our site. It's dealing with things that are just connected to our site, like local listings, social media, YouTube, again, if you're parts of organizations, and we'll kind of get into that kind of stuff, but pretty much anywhere that you can kind of connect back to your website can be a super beneficial thing for SEO. And so, okay, so those are going to be the three types of SEO with back end, front end, and offsite. And this is another really important thing, is that they're done in two different phases. And a lot of times people skip the first phase, and when they're talking about SEO, they just go to the second one. And so essentially what happens is you're trying to create a relationship with Google without them firmly knowing who you are, is really what happens if we don't take foundational SEO seriously. So what foundational SEO is it's laying kind of the foundation to your relationship with Google. And we'll go into this a little bit further throughout the presentation, but this is, for instance, setting up your service pages, making sure we have all of our content set, all of our metadata behind the scenes, making sure we have Google Analytics, Search Console, Google My Business, all of these accounts that are set and these things that we can do. Now, a lot of them, the reason we call them foundational is once we get them set, the idea is that we've communicated to Google what we do and where we do it so that they firmly understand that. Also, what's kind of nice about foundational SEO is it's mainly going to be kind of a one-time type of thing. Now, we obviously are going to be potentially changing, modifying, or optimizing, but we don't have to necessarily keep laying the foundation, because obviously that's what a foundation is we lay it down. Another analogy I like to use is foundational SEO is like laying the foundation to your house. Your website is going to be the house that sits on top of it. And then relational ongoing SEO is going to be like, for instance, maintaining your yard, fixing the roof if it leaks, adding new windows, adding a deck, adding new shrubbery, things that are going to be done over time, but we need to make sure that the whole foundation of the house is set before we start doing some of those other things. And so relational SEO is then building that relationship with Google over time so that now they know what you do and where you do it, but now it answers the why. Why should Google rank you above somebody else when they're searching for whatever search term they may be looking for? If they're searching for the best painters in Minneapolis, the best sunglasses, whatever it may be, if Google knows what we do and where we're at, now we can actually start building the relationship of why Google should pick us when someone's searching for X, Y, or Z that's related to us. Okay, so now moving into a little bit, okay, now we know obviously what SEO is, the three different types of SEO and the different phases. Now we want to start talking a little bit about actually implementing this. So the first is, honestly, whenever we're looking at starting SEO, re-auditing ourselves, doing foundational SEO, it comes with essentially kind of doing keyword research. And so the thing to remember is that Google now uses a technique called spider technique. They've been using it for years. So while yes, Google does try to do somewhat of matching a phrase of what you say onto a search, what they're really trying to get at is the meaning of your search term. And so what we want to make sure is at the beginning of all SEO strategy, you have to do somewhat of keyword research. Now, how aggressive you want to go with this is obviously going to potentially determine your success, but also potentially may determine your knowledge level or your desire to kind of do some of this. But at the very basis, what we want to do is, again, we want to do some keyword research. Now, a lot of times what I have clients do is the best thing you can do is to make two lists. One is do your services. So make a list, take a piece of paper, take a Word doc, make one list of all of your services. The next list is going to be all of your demographics, either the actual person that they're going for, or even geographically that if you have a geographic fence around your business, so to speak. So we would have essentially our services, and then we would have our demographics with geo. Really what you want to do then is you want to take any service that you have, and what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to come up with some of the keywords that you think people would be searching for. And again, it may sound very basic, but this is the start of how we're then going to, verify this data, discover more data, and then implement it. So once we have our list of all of our services, and again, we kind of have the demographics over to the side. Again, the most important thing is to start making a list. And usually I recommend for every service to try to at least come up with 5 to 10 different kind of search phrases or keywords or search queries that someone would be able to search for that your service would, again, be connected to. Now, here's the important piece to it, is once we have those lists, you can just use those to implement, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Or if you want to take it a step further, there are some tools that I highly recommend that you kind of look at that, again, can help you verify that data, discover more data, and then once we have that, we can use to implement it. So there's two platforms that I really like to highly recommend, and they also have freemium models. So you can use some of them at a very free basis, and if you want to go further, you can pay. Also, to be honest with you, with how important this is, they're pretty low cost, high value platforms. So the first one is called Moz, M-O-Z. Moz is a great way to, again, what we can do is, with Moz, we can take one of our landing pages, we can take one of our services, and we can plug this data that we just wrote out into there. And what Moz is essentially going to do is potentially going to tell us, okay, yes, those are good keywords because we have good search data. Or, hey, did you also think of this keyword that you could also add to that list that we see a lot of people searching for? Another platform that does this as well is called SEMrush. So again, that's SEMrush. They're very similar, two platforms that do a lot of the same things, but they do it just a little bit differently. But again, we can go ahead and not only verify what we think people would be searching for, but then potentially also discover new terms that may, again, be out there that we can obviously go after. So super critical. And then what we want to do is once we have that list from Moz or SEMrush, or again, if you decide to bypass that, at least you have your list. Then what you also want to do is you want to cross-reference that with some of your locations. So if some of your locations are Minneapolis, Minnesota, St. Paul, Twin Cities, you can see that we can have some variants of different keywords. If it's, again, best painter in Minneapolis, best painter in Minnesota, we can have some different variants of those to know and to kind of have our, again, peer list. So again, we want to make sure we have those services, have those demographics, write out our list ourselves, then cross-reference them within one of those platforms. This is, again, what we're doing here is we're trying to get the basis of these keywords that we're going to utilize for foundational SEO to communicate to Google. Now, once we have those, now this is where we actually start to implement these. And this is honestly, you're going to use these essentially kind of keywords to implement in not only back-end optimization, front-end optimization, and offsite optimization. The idea here is that we're essentially going to beat Google over the head with what we want to rank for. And, again, making sure that Google understands that. Also, it reinforces our services and our offerings that we have. So the first thing to make sure that we do, and this goes for either products or services or whatnot, but the best thing that you can do for foundational SEO to set yourself up for success is to have one page per service. And you could even take that a step further if you want, and you could have one page per service per demographic. But at least specifically, we want to make sure that we have one page per service. What we want to get away from is having one service page that just has all of our services listed. What happens there is Google may have a match. Like for instance, I always use landscaping as an example. If I'm a landscaper and I obviously do landscaping, I do, again, lawn, care like lawn mowing, also do fall cleanup, and I do snow removal. Well, that's great, but if I have all that one page, what happens then in the winter when someone's looking for snow removal, Google goes, hey, I've got a connection to you, but it only matches 25% of the content. Now, if you were to take that snow removal and now make it its own page and even flesh it out a little bit, which I'll get into in just a second, now Google goes, hey, I've got a match for you, and it's 100% match. That's why we want to make sure that we have some pages. Now, again, we do have to obviously mix that with modern design and user experience. So you can do certain things like maybe you do have a service page that lists all of your services. So it's very clean, it's very modern, but maybe you have little, again, read more or learn more buttons that then direct someone, if they want to read that more, they can do that. Or if someone's searching on Google, they can get redirected straight to that page. So again, obviously, again, when it comes to SEO, we do want to make sure that we're balancing it for, user experience and modern design, but knowing that we can kind of do that. Again, another question I get a lot of times is, okay, Ben, you talked about putting this into one service page. Well, how many words should I be, do? Is a paragraph fine? Do I need 6 pages? And the answer is, at a minimum, you want to at least be looking to have around 500 words. If you can shoot for 500 words, which a lot of times, if it goes back to your high school, again, days, like a 1-page, again, kind of paper, usually like 1.5 to double space, is usually around 500 words. So again, and then what we want to do is when we're creating that content, and either you can create this yourself, or this may be an opportunity, and a lot of times there's a high value in getting someone to potentially help you write this content, is then what we do is we know we have these, again, we had our services written out, we have all these keywords, and after the keyword research, we have all of these different key phrases there. Now what we essentially want to do is we don't want to stuff these keywords in there, but we want to use that as an influence for writing this content, trying to weave some of those, again, those key terms in there, trying to flow, flow some of the locations into there as well. And again, this is where sometimes it can help if you're working with an actual copywriter or something like that, because you may be able to give them just some bullet points to talk to them, and bam, and then you guys can kind of go back and forth. Now, some of you guys may want to do this yourself, and that's totally fine. It's just one of those things where content is one of the most critical things for SEO. And so we want to make sure that we have enough of it. And just with experience, I know sometimes, even for myself, it's not the most fun thing to do is to sit down and write. But again, if you can get that done, great. If not, just get some help, and it can just be kind of more of a one-time thing to get everything set. The other thing to remember too is when you're looking at creating content, the 3 buzzwords that we kind of utilize in the SEO world and within Google is unique, natural, and relevant. And so the most important one is unique. We want to stay away from trying to copy and paste. What happens when you copy and paste is that Google doesn't really give you credit for that content. They either give credit to the original source if you copied it from some other site, or they only give you 1 credit for it if, for instance, you just copy and paste the same content on your site. I'll give you an example. When I talked about having those different demographics for locations, if you wanted to have the best painter in Chaska, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Woodbury, if you wanted to have separate pages for those, that's fine, but you need to do more than just write 1 page and then swap out the city names. You actually need to try to change that content. A good rule of thumb is trying to change content if you do copy something, or if you want to use it as a framework, to change it about 30 to 40%. If we change it about 30 to 40%, we can usually get it up to that unique status and be able to kind of help us and then still get credit, because Google can still look at that as different, that we just didn't copy and paste it. So it's important that no matter if we're talking about service pages, if we're talking about white papers, if we're talking about blogs, articles, whatever you have on your site. Now, yes, there may be some situations where we have to copy and paste some content. I know, again, we work with legal, medical fields, even just anything. And again, minimal is okay as long as you know that we're not necessarily going to get an SEO benefit for it. If it's just for marketing and for messaging purposes, great. But again, especially for your service pages, we need to make sure that we're not copying and pasting. The other big buzzword that we use is natural. Making sure that, and again, I kind of alluded to this previously, is that we're just not taking these keywords and stuffing them into a paragraph or a page. I'm sure we've all read content before where, again, that just doesn't sound natural. Usually what I tell people is, if you couldn't print off your service pages and read them in front of a group of people, then you probably shouldn't have them on the site, and they're probably not written correctly. So again, you just need to make sure that we have that naturalness. Believe it or not, Google actually has software and AI technology within their algorithm that tries to determine the naturalness to actually try to combat either bots writing content or people keyword stuffing again content into it. So again, we obviously, yes, we want to make sure that our keywords are in our content. We want to make sure that our locations are in there. We want to make sure that we are cognizant of the keyword research we did and put those in there. But at the same point, again, just try and make it natural. That's also why having usually some more content, a minimum of 500 words, can actually really help you in this instance, because you're not trying to shove everything into 1 paragraph. You have some more content to work with. And then last but not least is relevant content. This usually has to deal with blogs, but even just, again, just in general, making sure that we're adding to the site that we have relevant content. obviously for marketing purposes, making sure that our website is up to date with content, but really just knowing that when it comes to relevant content, a lot of times blogs and things like that are actually dated when they come up in search results. So the reason I mention this is obviously things change as time goes on. Also, if you have something that's very relevant that continues to be relevant, you may want to come back to that and maybe rewrite that blog or write a version 2, version 3, because again, just showing you that if your blog shows up for someone searching for, whatever your blog topic is about, and it shows that you wrote that in 2016, it may be relevant, but human nature is just going to be, we want the newest one available because we want to make sure that this was in the now. So just a little bit of a marketing strategy thing there too is if you have blogs that are, again, doing well, if you have topics that are doing well on, again, your website, it's not a bad idea to potentially kind of refreshen some of those up. Now, again, we don't want to start deleting content and stuff like that, but potentially even just republishing it with a couple changes or things like that can really kind of help you out there. And just doing blogs in general, the good rule of thumb is trying to add something to your website at least once per month. Sometimes I'll deal with people and they'll say, hey, Ben, okay, so I know you've laid out this marketing strategy and for the next year, we want to do 1 blog per month. We want to do social. We want to do all this other kind of stuff. Why can't I just do all of that in 1 month and then just be done? Well, what I like to tell people is, again, it goes back to that business relationship. If you and I have a business relationship with each other and I send you 12 referrals the first month, I'm going to look like the best person ever to you. But then if you don't hear from me for the next 11 months, again, what's going to happen is our relationship is most likely going to erode. So this allows to kind of spread that out where now every month we're kind of touching base with Google and we're trying to build that relationship. So that's where, just as a rule of thumb, creating blogs, creating videos, having social content, getting reviews, all this other kind of stuff, which we'll get into some of that as well, is just important to kind of think about it on a monthly basis to try to reach out because, again, we're trying to build that business relationship with Google. We talked about the phase 1 and phase 2, but that, excuse me, but that really leads us into the Hummingbird update. And I mentioned this really at the beginning of this slide, but what's nice about the Hummingbird update is that this came out several years ago. And what this means is that, believe it or not, Google actually does a micro search every time you do your own search. And really why Google does that is, yes, way back in the day, Google would essentially take your, again, your search query and just try and match it on the page. They do a little bit of that more from a visual standpoint, but really what they're trying to do now is understand the meaning of what you are searching for. Like I always like to tell people is, if I were to hold this up and say, everyone right now in the chat, again, put what you would search for this in Google. I can guarantee you a lot of them are going to be similar, but there's going to be differences there. And that's what Google's trying to get out of is really understand how you may search something maybe different than I search something, or we may be meaning the same thing, but we might be using some different words. Like an example that I like to give is that when I worked at Google, the example that I would always, again, come up with, which was kind of fun, is that, I would search for Moss, M-O-S-S. And me being a Vikings fan and just all of that content and my search history and things like that and my location, a lot of times I would get Randy Moss. And I would sometimes have another person search and the search would actually be different. And they may either get Kate Moss, the model, or the green stuff that grows on trees. The idea here is, again, Google's trying to understand what you're talking about. Again, when we look at that. The other thing that also protects us on, though, too, is we don't need all the different variations that we used to in SEO, meaning that, Minneapolis painters and Minneapolis painter, we don't need to have every variation of like an S and things like that. The Hummingbird update really helps us get after, and again, going back to keyword research, having those 5 to 10 kind of core keywords that we're going to latch onto, because the idea is even though we have those core keywords, we're going to have an auxiliary effect that are going to affect other key terms that we're going to benefit from. Now, again, but that's why we also want to make sure that we prioritize those and do some keyword research at the beginning. And I think that's another really important piece to know too, is when we have our keywords here, or even our services and things like that, it's really important to prioritize those. I know we may be able to do everything under the sun in our industry or be able to help everybody, but as we all know with Marketing 101, we need to be somewhat specific. And so we need to make sure that obviously we have content to be able to, stretch across all of those, but you are going to want to make sure you prioritize them, because there are going to be certain situations, if we're talking about back-end optimization with metadata, potentially header tags on our images, or alt tags on our images, or our header tags on our content, that we may not be able to, again, actually get at putting all of our services or all of our demographics in there. We're going to have a little bit of prioritization to it. And then another thing to look to that I always like to kind of mention nowadays too is an SSL. Believe it or not only does this just protect your site. So an SSL, for those of you guys that don't know, is if you look at the top of your URL bar, right next to your website, there's usually a little padlock, a little green padlock. And if you hover over it, it should say this site is secure. If you don't have that, most likely it might say not secure. So a couple things with this is, actually last year, Google came out saying they wanted every website to have an SSL. So it actually, if we don't have it, it can be detracting from our SEO. Also, and again, it's not fun having a website that says not secure right at the top for users that are, again, visiting our site. Now, if you're curious on how do you get an SSL, or how do you fix maybe an issue if you're not seeing that, is you'd want to contact your hosting company. So wherever you host your website at, go ask them, and they'll absolutely be able to help you kind of with that. It's just the easiest way to kind of get that fixed. And then the last but not least thing to kind of look at here is that, again, this whole process is going to be longer but stronger. What we mean here is, again, talking about a business relationship. A healthy business relationship doesn't happen like that. But once we have a really healthy relationship, and again, it's not so volatile. Because again, going back to, we don't know who else is in our industry is doing SEO, which is, again, they're trying to make a relationship with Google as well. It's like going to a networking meeting and you're talking to someone, you're having a great time, but that person may then go to another networking meeting and one of your competitors is talking to them. That person is like Google. And so we need to know that if we can build up this relationship, then we can really be strong there at the top and not have to worry about, there may be something that maybe you do wrong, or we have a glitch or a malware or something on our site that goes wrong that could hurt some of our trust. And if we don't have any trust built with Google, again, that's really definitely going to hurt our rankings and hurt our opportunity to rank not only currently, but in the future. But as if we have a relationship with them, we obviously can help us we can obviously help make sure that, again, if anything does happen, that it's not negatively impacting us for the long term. And so I just wanted to stop just real quick and see if we had any questions on some of the stuff that I've talked about. Elizabeth, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions in the chat bar, but you guys are welcome. If you do have questions that come up, please pop them in the chat bar, and we will pause again and let Ben answer those.
Perfect.
I have one that just popped up. Back end, is that the same as technical SEO?
Yes, so that would essentially be the same as technical SEO for all intents and purposes. Yeah, so it's going to be a lot of, again, the technical or the kind of the back end kind of piece to it. One other piece I also would like to mention too that's really good for SEO when we talk about kind of front end optimization or our content is to make sure that you have, not just black text on a white background. Mix in some pictures, even mix in spacing. Believe it or not, one thing that Google does look at these days is user experience. So again, if you don't like looking at it when you're looking at a site, don't, we can have that on your site. Site speed, just your mobile experience, which we'll kind of get into here in a little bit more. But again, really think about also one of the key components to SEO is user experience. And Google literally spends millions of dollars doing market research, asking people what they want and implementing that into their, algorithms as well.
One more, we have a couple questions. 500 words for each page from Lisa. Also related, Tony says, when you're discussing the 500 words on the website, does that mean total with internal links on the website, or is that on the front pages online?
Sorry, yep. So thanks for clarifying that. 500 words per page. So if you have a service page, so if you have 4 main services, like with Skol Marketing, our 4 main services are web dev and design, SEO, SEM, and social media. We would say for each one of those pages, you at least at a minimum want to have 500 words. Now, again, you can go further in depth and you can have sub pages and things like that, but every core page on your site should strive to have a minimum of 500 words. Now, again, they don't have to all be right there. They can be split up a little bit. Like for instance, like a home page, you may not maybe get all the way to 500, but you may have some paragraphs here and there kind of out there.
Awesome.
Perfect.
That's it for right now.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so now shifting just a little bit into social media. And the reason I bring up social media isn't necessarily, we're not going to talk about how do we get more likes. Again, should I be on Instagram? Again, should I go and do a TikTok? We're not going to talk about that. But what we are going to talk about is there's mainly 4 main kind of components, 3 main social media platforms and 1 social component that can actually, if we're on them and we do them right, we can actually have a benefit via, SEO. It actually improves our relationship with Google. And so those 4 main, again, components that I'm talking about is, 1 is what was used to be called previously Google Plus, has since been deprecated, but there's a newer component called Google Posts, which we'll actually get into, but it's via Google My Business. So the little red pin on the map, that, again, there's a new function called Google Posts, which can help you with SEO for doing that social component. But the actual 3 social media sites that can actually help, and Google, so the reason this helps is Google has direct relationships with Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. So what that means is when you post on a business account on Facebook, or you post on any Twitter account or any Pinterest account, Google essentially has a relationship that they're actually indexing that content. What used to happen is when Google didn't have, direct relationships with Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest, is they would essentially have to knock on Facebook's door and say, hey, how is this person doing? Or just get a brief kind of description. Now what Google can see though is that you're producing content, you're active online, you're using an offsite platform, like we talked about offsite optimization. This is a really big key to it, and we can build up our presence. And believe it or not, your Facebook posts these are only for business pages, not personal, can actually show up on Google. Really, at the end of the day, what that means is Google is indexing them and understanding, and most likely you're going to be posting stuff about your business. So you're using keywords, you're using key phrases that you've come up with. So again, posting on Facebook, posting on Twitter, and pinning things on Pinterest. The pins on Pinterest actually get pulled into Google Images. So if you have anything that are visual, if you have, again, any types of PDFs or infographics, they can be super powerful in actually driving traffic to your site, because again, on Pinterest, Google actually takes those pins and puts those into Google Images. So what we're talking about here is, again, you want to make sure that you're active on the platforms. Again, that you're picking. Don't just pick these. Here's my other thing too is, don't just pick these platforms to like get SEO benefit. Pick them because you're going to utilize them, because you should be picking them first for social media. I just like to mention that there is an SEO component to social media that's there. And so sometimes we just forget about it, but when you're trying to look at the ROI that you're putting into it, either time, energy, and money into social media, it's important to kind of look at this. Also on the right-hand side here, you can actually see for Facebook specifically, when we talk about kind of that knowledge graph, so especially when someone's searching for your business, Google will actually pull in like the reviews that you have on Facebook. It'll actually also most likely pull in the profiles, the different social profiles that you have, to also show people show users that they can find you on those social media platforms and actually have hot links to those. So again, it's just another way that we can obviously increase engagement potentially on social media, but also just realizing that there is a connection between Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. And then we have that component that we're going to talk about here later with Google Posts, which used to essentially be the whole platform of Google+. So Again, social media is very important. And the other thing I always like to mention is just because you don't see your platform on here does not mean that you shouldn't be on those. Honestly, everybody on this call should be on LinkedIn. Everyone on here should be looking at Instagram. Depending on your business, you may want to be looking at Snapchat or TikTok. Even though it may not have an SEO component, obviously it may have a branding and a marketing component. But again, I just like to mention from a pure SEO standpoint, there is some benefit to being on social media. So kind of moving into, again, mobile friendliness. And so really what we used to kind of have is we had just pure desktops, then we just had mobile specific sites. And then now what we have is mobile responsive sites, meaning that it's a liquid template and it's responding to the size of your screen. Now, honestly, it's almost near impossible to even have a website built these days that's not mobile friendly. And it's, again, it's getting more and more rare to find people that don't have a mobile friendly site. Now, if you don't have a mobile friendly site, is that you absolutely need to get that fixed before you do any SEO, because it's gotten to the point where if your website is not SEO, or excuse me, mobile optimized, again, it's like running up a hill with a rock or a weight on your back. It's just, you're not going to get there because having a mobile friendly site is so critical. Now, the reason for that is because traffic, the majority of traffic that's now done just on the internet is done via a mobile device. If you looked at most of your Google Analytics, probably not everybody, but most of you would find out that the majority of your traffic is coming from a mobile device. And so it's really important that we have, again, our site be mobile. We have our site be mobile optimized there. Another key component to why we want it mobile optimized, and to even go into this further, is that last year, Google came out with something called, mobile first indexing, and is really kind of starting to roll that out officially kind of this year. What that means is across the board, Google will essentially be reading your mobile site experience first and applying that score to the desktop. It doesn't sound like much, but that's a 180 from what used to happen. Google used to essentially, analyze your desktop, obviously still make sure you had a mobile, site and presence, and then kind of apply that score to it. Now with that reversed, we needed to, and it's quite interesting because we obviously build sites on a desktop, and we most likely as a business owner are probably viewing our site on a desktop. So it's sometimes easier to forget about the mobile site in general and the mobile, just experience. Now, I do get questions of, well, hey, Ben, is there a way to optimize my site on a desktop and then optimize my site on a mobile site? And the answer really is kind of, but you're doing it the same way. What you just want to check with now, though, is for a few things. One is you want to check that mobile speed is, for instance, the same as the desktop. You want to make sure that you can still view your site and experience it the same way and get to the same places that you can on a desktop. Like for one example that we a lot of times go through is, especially when I'm telling you guys to do 500 words per page, sometimes if it's not built correctly, or depending on how our website is sometimes that can be a lot of content to scroll through. And maybe that's not the best user experience. So maybe it's a matter of using a learn more button to go to another page, having just a service page. Maybe it's using like one of those accordions where it's collapsed right now and then we press it and then it expands. Things like that, just to kind of look at some of our mobile experience. So I encourage you to take some time to look at your site on a mobile device, have maybe friends or family or acquaintances look at it on a mobile device, and really just make sure you can do the same things that you can on a desktop. And if there's any pain points, to really kind of address those, because I guarantee you'll notice this within your Google Analytics with either people dropping off, or like I said, it could potentially, depending on what it is, it could be even impacting your SEO and your relationship with Google, because again, that user experience is so critical, and we're moving everything to a mobile first type of indexing. So super important to look at when we have mobile devices and we're looking at optimizing them, is that yes, we're most likely going to build our site on a desktop, but we need to make sure that we're testing it on a mobile device and make sure that we have that experience taken care of. Okay, now transitioning into local listing. So this would be a part of offsite optimization. And I kind of mentioned this with Google My Business. That's what this platform is, but obviously there's other ones out there. There's Bing, there's Yelp, There's obviously, again, plenty, there's dozens upon dozens of other local listings. I will say that these are usually the top 3 that we like to kind of look at. And really what we're talking about here is, I'm sure we've all experienced this, it's kind of like the online Yellow Pages. It's a brief kind of introduction, almost a mini just, again, kind of listing for your site. This also, again, if we go back, this is where we have the snack pack. And so on the top, of the search results, in the middle there, I kind of talked about that there's that snack pack where they actually show 3 listings. This is where that's pulling from. And so what we want to look at is, again, not only trying to optimize our actual Google local listing, and then of course having other local listings like Bing and Yelp, et cetera, but also realizing that SEO actually impacts these, especially for Google. Now, a couple things to know with Google My Business that I always like to make sure that people are aware of. So one is that, one is you can actually have it be at a physical location, but you don't have to have a physical location to have a Google My Business account. Now, again, Google My Business and all local listings are really meant for local customers, where your website would then be for your global customers. So if you're purely e-commerce, most likely this isn't going to maybe be the best platform for you. But if you do have some local presence, or obviously if your company is definitely local based, then you absolutely want a Google My Business account and other local listings. Now, one thing is, I kind of alluded to this before, is Google has a feature called Google Posts. And so this used to essentially be kind of what Google Plus was. Google Plus, for those of you guys who don't know, was kind of Google's version of Facebook. It didn't, again, take off. They finally deprecated it last year. But what they did is they rolled kind of like the posting feature of creating different posts like you would a Facebook post into Google My Business. So you can actually go into Google My Business and you can actually create these mini posts. So you can, again, announce things like you would on Facebook. You can run deals, you can run events. So all these different types of things you can do. Not only is it good for marketing because you can find more exposure, but also it can help you rank better because we're adding more content to our Google My Business account. Just like our website, when we add more blogs, when we add more service, when we add more words, videos, pictures, that helps us, again, get up there. And so this is another really good one to really kind of pay attention to, because I can almost guarantee you that a lot of your competition are not doing Google posts. And if you're doing social media posting, well, some of those posts are probably most likely going to fit perfectly into doing Google posts on your Google My Business account. Another thing that you're also able to do on Google My Business, along with, again, other listings out there, especially like Yelp, is reputation management. So getting reviews. Getting more reviews doesn't mean you're necessarily going to go to the top, but it definitely has an impact on that. So also reminding ourselves that with reputation management, with these reviews, is responding to them. Not only the negative ones, I know like a lot of people just like to respond to the negative ones, but realizing that we can also respond to the positive ones, even if it's just a simple thank you. That can kind of help, because again, you're interacting with the platform more, you're adding more content to it, and just at the end of the day, that's what these platforms want, so we might as well do it. I always do like to mention too is, remember when you're responding and you're doing reputation management, you are responding publicly as the owner. And so again, I know it can be frustrating if you have a negative review. I know it can be frustrating if you have some, again, questions about the validity. I will say that Google's very strict with, if a review goes up, I will say it's very hard to get it down, because Google's not going to play the truth police or whose side is correct, or obviously they have the First Amendment. But again, overall, that's a very rare instance. Reviews are very powerful, not only from marketing and having people decide which company to go for. I'm sure we've all done that ourselves, but also even for SEO, again, within there. And so it's just really important just to make sure you take the time to respond not only to the positive ones, but also the negative ones. And then also know that within your Google My Business, and also even other local listings as well, as this is where we can actually get links, and you can actually help your marketing by encouraging people and sending either them via text, via email, in person, to actually go and write your review at your location. This is also one of the top, top ways that people, ask me, hey, Ben, what way would you suggest that I try and get the best SEO results right away? What's my best ROI? What's my quickest way? Honestly, it's Google My Business, because we can get a local listing, we can get something up and going, and they can rank a lot faster than an actual website. Now, again, having a website and SEO and having a relationship with Google can definitely help this, and vice versa. Having one of these can help our relationship with Google, which can help our website. But just knowing that this can be a really powerful way, especially as we kind of talked about, is if we get in that snack pack, we could also then be listed in the snack pack, and potentially one or two of our pages on our website could be ranking below that. So again, we could be doubling or tripling our chances of getting chosen, because of course, if there's only 12, or 15 total results on a page, if you own 2 or 3 of them and everyone else owns 1, obviously simple math's going to tell you that you have a 2 to 3 times more chance of getting chosen. And last but not least is, we're talking about Google My Business here, but as we kind of alluded to, there's dozens upon dozens of other local listings out there. One platform that I like to kind of recommend, now it does cost to do it, but for instance, a Moz Local has a platform where you can essentially submit your listing information, and it will try and actually go out there and fill in all of the other local listings, so you don't have to do those. I will always recommend that you should probably do like Google, Bing, and Yelp on your own, just to make sure. But I think it can be important, though, to look at it like, in Moz Local, and try and get our information out there as much as possible, instead of manually having to try and find, again, these dozens upon dozens of different listings to have to manually verify. So local listings, very, very important. And I know we have a question here.
Yes. So we have a question. I'm not totally understanding what Google My Business is.
Google My Business is your local listing. So you see the little red pin on the map, that is called your Google My Business listing or your Google My Business account. So Google My Business is literally just a pin on the map, or having an account that has multiple pins if you have multiple locations. So just like you would have a Yelp account where you'd be listed on Yelp Maps, and also I should clarify too, is the reason I recommend you should be on Yelp is because Apple Maps, believe it or not, actually pulls from Yelp. So if you want to show up very well on Apple Maps on a mobile device, you better be on Yelp. If you want to show up on Google Maps, either on the desktop or on an Android device, you better have a Google My Business account.
So it's just a matter of setting up an account in each search option.
Not search option, each location. Well, so search option as in local listing. Again, Google has, which is called Google My Business. Bing has their own. Yelp has their own. And there, again, there are dozens upon dozens other ones if you want to do them manually. But that's why I recommend like a Moz Local, because you can set up the Google one, the Bing one, and the Yelp one by yourself. And then you could get a program like Moz Local that'll help you set up all the other ones. Any other questions?
I think that's it right now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, moving on. So, so going through some of the different Google tools that we can utilize to help us with SEO. The first is Google Analytics. Now, oddly, or again, coincidentally enough, this is one of the tools that, probably the only tool that we're going to talk about here today that just getting on it and utilizing it actually doesn't help with SEO. Again, we talk about if we get service pages, if we even use social media correctly, if we get Google My Business or the local listings, those help with SEO. Analytics doesn't necessarily help directly with SEO, but it helps us verify and read all of the analytics and the stats to help us verify and discover new areas and to see what's working and kind of what's not potentially as well. And so a couple things, we actually have 2 presentations just on Google Analytics to give you how in-depth you can go on this. But a couple things that I like to kind of mention is everyone, when you leave here, should make sure that you have Google Analytics and have it installed. The reason for that is you cannot retroactively go get data with Google Analytics, meaning that you may say, hey, Ben, I'm just not ready to look at all the analytics and do all that kind of stuff right now. I'll maybe do that in 6 months. Well, that's great, but if you don't have Google Analytics running, for those 6 months, you can't get that data back. So always make sure, you just have to log into google.com/analytics. You might have to have somebody help you with this because it can be a little tricky getting it installed if you're not familiar with this. But I always tell people is if you just Google, for instance, if you have a Squarespace site, install Google Analytics on Squarespace, install Google Analytics on WordPress, whatever it may be. But really here, you can get as much, you probably are going to get more information on Google Analytics than you'd probably even want to know or realize you could know. Things like, again, what mobile device, mobile traffic compared to a desktop traffic, splitting up between, okay, I can see my traffic came from a search engine, compare that to a social media site, see which pages are being viewed the most, see where people are actually dropping off on pages, as I kind of talked about. Maybe it's an indication that there's something wrong with that page, or user experience isn't, again, what you want it to be. All of this can actually be analyzed, and it's all for free via Google Analytics. And so you would just have to set that up. Or again, if you have it set up, I encourage you to check out our other workshop or see some of our materials that we have online to kind of help you with analytics, or reach out if you want some more one-on-one kind of time as well. But really, Google Analytics is super powerful, especially as you start getting into implementing SEO, as well as implementing marketing in general. Another really, again, powerful tool is called Google Search Console. And so what Search Console does is it essentially does a few things. One is it puts you in direct contact with Google. So if you ever have any major malware issues or search, again, issues where Google is blacklisting you, you can actually communicate via this platform. But for most of us, and probably even more importantly, what it does is it gives us some data and analytics that were kind of taken away from us a few years ago, as well as can help us with SEO. Now, the biggest way that it can help you with SEO is you're verifying this account, you're verifying your domain and your website. And then what we want to do is we want to make sure that you upload a sitemap. A sitemap is going to be, it's called a live XML file. Really what it is it's a skeleton of your site. And then what happens is every time you make a change on your site, you essentially are raising your hand to Google saying, hey, I just made a site. I need you to index this. Now, obviously, Google will index it no matter what, but it may be delayed or it may not be 100% correct because, again, we're now laying things out correctly in the way that Google wants to see and read them. And anytime we can do that, that can help our relationship with Google, which obviously can help our rankings as well. We also can get, again, there's certain kind of features that we can do. Right now, Google has looked at, we actually can get, and they're actually even doing some beta testing and coming out with a new feature on Search Console that it's even going to give us more. But we used to essentially be able to get keyword data on Google Analytics. We could actually see all the keywords that people typed in to get to our site. Super valuable. Unfortunately, due to privacy reasons, Google removed that. There are now some things that Google is releasing on Search Console you can get now, and they're actually beta testing some further ones that will even help us more. So what I'm trying to say is, if, again, especially with search engine optimization, you definitely want to look at getting Search Console. Now, again, it's completely free. You would just, the best way to get a Google Search Console account would be to Google Search Console, and you'll be able to set up your account, again, with it. What you're going to do is you're going to connect this to your website. And really, once we get the sitemap, once we get that kind of stuff, we're going to be able to essentially just kind of let it go. Another really big important thing that it does for you is that Google will actually analyze your site for any warnings or issues that they think that your site may have. It may have to deal with a mobile experience, and maybe have to deal with malware, may have to deal with something. But what's really kind of nice is you'll actually get an email that says, hey, we found this, you really should take, you should look at this. This page wasn't working. This is delivering a 404, things like that. And so it can be super valuable in managing your site and making sure things and user experience are at the top. I think we had a question, right, Elizabeth?
Yes, from Kimberly Ide. If we are changing domains due to business name change and are moving our site to a new domain, does this break our relationship history with Google?
Yes, if not done correctly. And so there's a whole conversation, but what I'll tell you to look at is it's called 301 redirects. You essentially are going to have to map out every single user, or again, URL path on your site. And then you're going to have to do a 301 redirect for every single one of those to the new one. Again, it might be something that if you have more questions, I can answer that more specifically if you want to reach out, but absolutely 100%, again, make sure that you take a chance to look at that, because yes, if you don't do it correctly and you change your domain name, you can almost essentially all that clout equity that you built with your current site can be honestly just, destroyed, and you're starting from square one again if you don't do it correctly. So, these tools can actually help you do some of that, but you need to absolutely either write down 301 redirect and look that up, or please reach out to whatever, because we hate seeing that. And we wouldn't want you to lose all that equity that you built. Even like what I tell people, even if you've never done SEO and done SEO work or taken it seriously, just having your website up and just having it over the past 2, 5, 10, 20 years, obviously is still something you've built up. Perfect. Okay, moving along just a little bit so the next one is YouTube. Now, again, this is one that we do a whole other presentation on as well. But the reason I mention YouTube here is not only is it crazy the amount of videos and the amount of videos that people want to view. Studies have shown that now over 2/3 of people would actually prefer to watch a video rather than read. And so sometimes it's kind of funny. We have a little bit of a two sides pulling from each other, in that we have Google that wants to read stuff more, and that's how we can better communicate to them. But now we have 2/3 of people that would actually rather watch a video. So we can obviously, kill two birds, again, both of them with kind of one stone of taking our content and putting it into words, but then also making a video out of it. YouTube is definitely the platform that I would recommend. You can definitely use Vimeo or Dailymotion or any other kind of video platform out there. But the reason that YouTube is going to be recommended is a few things. One is it's owned by Google. And two is it's the second largest search engine in the world. So not only does Google own number one with google.com, they also own the second largest search engine in the world of YouTube. And so YouTube can be a fantastic way of, again, you could take one of your blog posts and make it into a video. Maybe it's talking like this, and maybe we have a couple people. Maybe it's just talking into a camera. Maybe it's taking, again, your cell phone and looking at creating a video of behind the scenes at your factory, or a DIY type of content if you're an auto mechanic, or whatever you're essentially kind of doing. Give you an example, we're doing that right here. We'll be recording this and we'll be putting it onto our YouTube channel, getting content created in YouTube videos out of this. And so it's just another thing that we can obviously embed those onto the site. I've kind of mentioned this a couple times throughout the presentation that Google doesn't like just to see text on your site. They want to see other elements because that helps with user experience. Well, videos are a perfect way. We can embed some of those videos into certain pages, into certain, again, elements on our site to increase that. And so it's just having videos can be a real benefit to your SEO and creating that relationship with Google because of the opportunities that are there, as well as how much people love video, and it's honestly just exploding even from there. Okay, so starting to wrap up here again, the last product that we're going to talk about is Google Ads. Now, again, the reason I mentioned this one is that just running Google Ads doesn't necessarily increase your SEO. But what it does, though, is that if you have a good relationship with Google, it can actually improve your ads, again, so you could potentially get better rankings and a better CPC because you have a better user experience and relationship with Google. Google Ads can be very powerful, and honestly, SEO and SEM, which is what kind of Google Ads is called, search engine marketing, can really work well to get together. Now, obviously, it is an extra, again, cost. You're spending money on it. But again, I do like to kind of just mention it because there's sometimes a myth out there that if I run Google Ads, it's going to improve my SEO. It's quite the reverse of that. And if you do, again, pay for ads, that's great. And you can get, you can be ranked up there. You're paying for that. But, again, it's not going to help your SEO. But this can be powerful in that if we went back to the previous, one of the first slides we talked about, is that, you could be running an ad, then you could be in the local listing, and then maybe you could have, again, your website ranking once or twice in the organic search results. Now, again, now you're ranking 2, 3, 4 times, and you can actually have a higher percentage of, again, being able to be found. We have a question?
Yes. And I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to let you answer it. Are Google Ads more effective than Facebook ads?
So, well, it kind of depends on what you're trying to do, but here's, again, it's a fantastic question. Here's the philosophical difference between running ads on social media and running ads on Google. Is when you run ads on Google or any search engine, because Bing, you can run ads as well, but anytime you run an ad on a search engine, you're essentially designating the keywords that you only want the ads to show up for. So you're essentially targeting people that are actively searching for you. Whereas on Facebook or social media, you're going after the demographic. Now, we may not know the demographic on search engine ads in that, again, we may know where they're at, but we don't know who they are, their likes, their dislikes. So on social media, we can go after their likes and dislikes and things like that. But again, while they're on social media, we're trying to convert them off because we think that they might be interested. So on average, again, I will say both of them work well together, but on average, Google ads or search engine ads in general are usually you're gonna see a higher conversion rate, but they're also gonna be more expensive because again, you're going after someone that's actively looking for you. Whereas on social media, again, they're going to be cheaper because it's a little bit of kind of display and we need to kind of convert them from what they're doing to actually leave social media and come do what we want them to do. But again, they both can definitely work. It does, there are some things that we talk about of, are you B2C? Are you B2B? Which platform are you using? What are you trying to sell? Obviously it's much easier to sell a pair of sunglasses on, again, Facebook than a house. You know what I mean? Like, so purchase price obviously has a thing to do with it as well. But on average, you are going to see higher conversion rates usually for what you're looking for because you're going after someone that's actively searching for you on a search engine. Perfect. So again, I know we talked a lot there and I know we kind of, again, just kind of introduced this. The idea though is, again, we're talking about the economic impact, $355 billion in 2018. We know that that's actually gonna, again, increase here for 2019 when those stats come out, and really looking at, the content on our site, starting with that keyword research, looking at Moz, looking at SEMrush, making sure that we have the different service pages, then looking at, making sure that we're on social media for the right reasons, being the number one being to be on social media. Two, almost like a positive collateral damage type of effect would be that we can actually get a benefit from Google. And then looking at obviously mobile devices, making sure that we realize that we have, this mobile first indexing that's being laid out by Google, that they're going to be really honing in on the user experience on our mobile device. Looking at Google My Business, making sure that we know that we should have a Google My Business account, that we should look to, again, get one optimized and use Google Posts. And then finally, again, our Google Analytics, our YouTube, our Search Console, all these tools that we should be utilizing. And then wrapping up, if we want to add more, we can do something like Google Ads or AdWords, and knowing that better SEO, again, SEO being that long-term business relationship with Google, can really impact on all those things. So with that said, I really hope that you guys took something away. I know we're going to open it up here for questions, but just want to do a couple reminders to everyone that we are recording this and we'll be putting this on YouTube as well as sending you a copy of that. So with that said, I do want to open it up for any other questions that may be out there too.
What is the difference between Google Ads and Google AdWords?
It's the same. It's just they rebranded from Google AdWords to Google Ads. So I say both because out of habit, but also because sometimes people only know one or the other, but they're the exact same thing. Perfect.
All right. One more here. When Googling a business and finding inaccurate information, such as location, how would you correct that?
Yep, so you can report that as a user, but obviously if you're the business owner, that would be, again, claiming or creating that Google My Business account, and you're then going to be able to kind of, confirm that or correct that. You can report some of those things as a user to Google, but more importantly, obviously, if it's your business, that's where that Google My Business account comes into play, and you would essentially claim that and verify that, and there's a process that it's going to take you through. It's pretty easy, but you're going to be able to then do that yourself.
If you have a national business for Google Local, do you need to set up multiple key markets?
Yeah, so if you have multiple locations, you would want to do one for, again, kind of every location that's there. Now, you do have to have, again, somewhat of a presence there, somewhat of an office or whatever. If you're just in e-commerce and you don't again, have a location there or have any presence there, and you just, again, can go over there by default, it's not going to work for you, but you can set up multiple locations either in the same, again, area, like the Twin Cities hypothetically, or nationwide. Perfect. Well, we'll give people just a couple more minutes to ask questions. I'll just kind of wrap it up. I just want to say thank you guys for tuning in. As I talked about previously, if you guys have any questions that didn't get answered or that come up as you're actually trying to implement this stuff, please feel free to reach out. Obviously, reference this on YouTube when we send it out, as well as the PDF slides that we'll be sending. I encourage you to check out some of our other workshops on our website that we're doing, and with webinars and with great partners across the Twin Cities like the Reserve. And last but not least is, if you do want to talk more to us, feel free to reach out. We one way that we kind of give back to the community is we offer essentially like free consultations. And so these aren't sales pitches. If you guys want to talk about our services, awesome. I just know that obviously these topics are very heady. I talk fast. These are topics that can sometimes be hard to implement. And also, as you kind of know, we have to do more sometimes of a classroom style. So we may not be able to talk specifically about your situation. So I encourage you guys all, we're just, again, we do this to give back. We want to make sure that you guys feel educated, really take advantage of some of the free work that we can do in advice. And so if you're interested in one of those, feel free just to email us and we would set up a time and we would actually just talk with you, go over your questions. And maybe it's not about SEO. You could ask us about really any type of thing about marketing. We're there to essentially kind of help, but encourage you to take advantage of that if you do have some more questions or wants, again, if you want help setting up your Google My Business account, if you want to verify that Google Analytics is, working correctly, if you want us to look at your website and look to see if there's any, again, suggestions, we can do those sorts of things. And again, like, it's completely complimentary. So just feel free to reach out if you have any of those questions. And thanks again for having me, guys.
Thank you.